Hey, welcome to Ask for Help. I'm here with my good friend, that way. I'm here with my good friend, Bryan Baker.
There you go. Like
This
you're
is
there, right?
the live
Hey.
stream, TFL Live, Ask for Help, your chance to get your questions about 3D printing hardware, software, print issues, all answered here on this show that we do every Saturday night at 7 Mountain Standard Time. Hey, Bryan, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm good now. I'm, loving this computer. There's only so many bugs I can generate at this point. So
We had some tiny issues tonight. Just some tiny
yeah,
ones.
who would have guessed I would have had some random system interrupts? Hopefully my video quality and audio quality is better now because I did the bad thing and I stopped using Google Chrome and started using Microsoft Edge. Ooh.
Ooh.
Hey, it's based off Chrome now. It's the same thing. So
Oh, I see. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, I tell you what, we're going to get started. We'll run that intro and then we'll say hello to some people. Hey, welcome back. I hope you liked that intro. It was fun making that. Let's say hello to some people this evening. First of all, our good friend Jerry Knapp down in Las Vegas, or Lost Wages, whichever you prefer. He's from 3D Printing and Painting. He says he's reposted our stream over on his Facebook group, and we thank him very much for that.
Thanks,
Rex
Jerry.
Waldy. Hello, Rex. Andrew Bell. We've got a question from Andrew Bell coming up tonight in our Ask for Help. Snapshot FPV David Sell, DePark 88. Andrew Bell is in the UK, by the way. It's 2 a.m. there. Thank you for staying up. We do appreciate it. Then we've got Martin Bass from the Netherlands. Well, good morning to you over in the Netherlands. There's Sean Gould. We've got High Tech Redneck, Jared Armstrong, Sausage. Honey, I'm home. Louis Chavas, I hope I said that right. I probably didn't. LB Sharp, we do have a question from LB tonight. Justin Miller, 3D Medic Vince, Gary T. Greetings from Chinooki, Calgary, Gary T says.
It's
Robert
gorgeous. I have the window open.
And Pierre Zrobotic. Good evening from Edmonton. All right, good evening, everybody. We've got a lot of questions tonight. Wow, do we ever have a lot of questions tonight?
I woke up from hibernation, and now the printers need to work again, right?
Yes, that's right. So we are going to kick things off. I'm going to let you know that the Super Chat is enabled for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. So if you are so inclined and you got something out of tonight's video, we would really appreciate it if you threw us a little something in Super Chat. You don't have to. Everything's free here. So except for our merch, you can always go get that over at Teespring. Here, let me do this.
If it was free, even I'd have one. And look at me, I'm
That's
just wearing
true.
Deadpool instead. So.
You're just wearing Deadpool.
I'm getting it. It's also very warm. As I said, I got the window open. This took
true.
Too long, but it's supposed to snow tomorrow, so I'm enjoying
There you go.
What can I say?
Hey,
Yes.
we got Terry Murphy in the house tonight, Joseph Jolly, Justin Miller, Dan Adams. Wow, we've got a lot. Omaha. Justin Miller's from Omaha. Mutual of Omaha. I remember that.
Attack here tonight is we got lots of emails that came in there, so we're going to go through those questions. But post all your questions to the chat below. Give a thumbs up while you're down there, and we're going to go and see how many questions we can hit in an hour. So fire them away.
All right, so let's start with Pierre Blanchard. He says, "Evening, Richard. I've been purchasing from Spool 3D the 1 kilogram rolls of filament. I have to assume." Is the 4.5 kilogram wider or the diameter bigger? Thank you and like your show. Well, thank you very much, Pierre. I want to tell you it is bigger. So it's about the thickness of 2 rolls, and it does have a much larger diameter. So yes and yes. So you will, if you're going to get the 4.5 kilogram rolls, you are probably going to have to rig up some sort of special spool holder for it.
Like something I got over here, actually. I'll see if I can grab it.
Yeah, you've got something like that.
Yeah, for the 2 kilogram rolls, to give you an idea.
Okay.
I had to reach over and get her there. So we built out of 2020 extrusion and some wheel bearings a nice 2 kilogram one. So actually, I just have another roll up here. of
There you
Spool
go.
3D. So this is what a 1 kilogram looks like on that to give you an idea of width. So it's almost literally double.
Yes.
And then when you add the 4.5, then it's, you know, it's double the size. So there's two things you got to consider with that. You know, first is that sizing, and then at that point you have to question if you're starting to have under extrusion because of tension on that, you're going to have much bigger ones with 4.5. So
Yes.
if you want to be my lamb, my test lamb, and try one of them out, let me know, because I mean, I do love my filament runout sensors. If you guys have seen the video, I love those things, but I don't love having to change filaments. So the bigger, the better.
The bigger, the better. There you go.
And yes, there are 10 kilogram rolls out there.
So we've got, did I say hi to Dan Adams? I think I did. Yes, I did.
Well,
hello,
here's
Dan
another hello
Adams,
to Dan.
I think, yes, I think I did. So let's see what we got going on in the chat right now before we get to another question.
Nothing really. Everyone's talking about the weather. So
Yes.
with that, you know what? I'm going to give you guys a seasonal reminder. Now that things are warming up, that means humidity will increase in the air. So be sure to
Absolutely.
check your filament and give it a good drying run before you put it through your machines, because seasonally, especially in Calgary where the humidity is like only 10%, in the summer we get an increase in stringing and other issues that, simply put, don't exist in the wintertime. So you know, just do a seasonal checkup on your printer and on your filament.
You know, that brings up a good point. Speaking of doing checks on your printer, now's a great time before we move into that spring and summer temperatures, which tend to get a little higher. Do a little bit of maintenance on your printer. You can get yourself a brass brush to clean off your hot end. And how you use that is you just heat up your hot end and just take the brass brush and just kind of scrub the bottom of it, get any loose material off that might have built up over the last few months. That might be a good idea. As well as put a little bit of lithium grease on your rod, or not your rods. Well, you could do that if you've got smooth rods that thing's right up and down on. But if you've got, you know, something that's on wheels, you don't really have to do that. But you will have to grease up the lead screw a little bit, so it'll take out some of that squeakiness that might have built up over the wintertime. It's a great time to do a general cleaning on your 3D printer. Spring cleaning, include your 3D printer in that. So
I just catch up with Martha and Babs is saying, even PLA, do you need to dry that? Actually, PLA more so than anything. PLA and PETG are the two plastics that really do like to absorb moisture. And
they do.
And even I'm going to laugh because my HIPS filament that I've been playing around with, the polystyrene there, it actually doesn't absorb that much moisture. It does when you drop it in the snowbank when walking to the car today. So that's why I threw out the reminder to dry all your filament, is because I dropped it in a snowbank.
You know, the other thing about that too is that you'll notice when your filament has too much moisture in it, especially when it comes to PLA, because it gets very brittle. If it's very brittle, it's because it has absorbed too much moisture from the air. You could leave PLA in a bucket of water, take it out, and start printing with it. That's not how hydroscopicity, I hope that's the word I'm using correctly. I hope.
Word of the day. Tell us how to spell it in the chat, guys.
Yeah, there you go. That's not how that works. I mean, you could put filament in water all day long and it won't absorb the actual liquid. It's absorbing moisture molecules from the air, so it's a little different. So I just want to remind everybody of that.
And a good sign is to, when you start a print, before anything, extrude, I'm going to be generous and say 200 millimeters of filament. Listen to that hot end. If you hear any kind of popping, what that is that's the rapid boiling of micro water molecules inside your nozzle. And although it actually although it won't cause any clogging or anything like that, you'll notice that when you start to print, you're going to start having little micro gaps in your layer lines. And that's a good way to tell, is that it's basically extruding water instead of extruding filament. So you know you'll never see water on your bed, but you'll hear it pop. So
oh yeah, absolutely.
If you hear the crackling, it's time to just start drying.
All right, let's take this next question from Gizmo, because it sounds kind of like an interesting one, and both you and I have experienced what he's asking. I just watched the stream, but got in too late to have you get to my question. I have a BL Touch on my Ender 3. Sometimes when it's probing the bed at the start of the print, it will trigger before the probe actually touches the bed. Then my bed level will be messed up and I have to start the print again. Can you give me some suggestions on what I can change to try and make it work? I can tweak Marlin if that's where the solution lies, and that's exactly where the solution lies. Mike Gizmo Bowen, the problem is if you did not use the Creality firmware update for the BL Touch on the Ender 3, and you just used a version of Marlin and did what we've done so many times in the past by using the example file in Marlin and then just building ourselves a brand new Marlin firmware batch, the problem kind of comes up that it uses up too much memory on the board. So it kind of gets a little confused when it's trying to put all those probe locations into memory so that it remembers how to go across the plane of the bed. So the simple answer is I would update the firmware with the Creality version firmware and not the firmware that is vanilla Marlin. What do you say to that, Brian?
I actually had a different approach on that. So I always rule out in favor. Bear in mind, the firmware is actually pretty solid, regardless of which version you use. And there are some items you can do for stability with Marlin 2.0 to help with the BL Touch. But I'm going to go back to basics here. Step number 1, check your connector on the main board. Now, I know a lot of people, they don't go and put the proper connectors on there. They stick with the regular, I'm going to say it's DuPont, correct? The black ones that have no tabbing on them?
Yep, that's
the ones
DuPont.
that the BL Touch comes with. Some people just plug them into the board and walk away. That's great. But any kind of micro movement will cause that end stop to register as triggered. So I always say replace them with the proper connector so that they click into the board. And we'll maybe talk about that in the future about connectors.
Proper connectors on board. That's actually a good idea.
There is a wire extender that you can get from Spool 3D or any other vendor there that has that proper connector to plug into most boards. It'll come with a 3 and a 2, and I'm going to go out and say it's a JST, but I could be wrong. Just check it out, and that solved a lot of my issues. Now, issue number 2 was having the 2 wires, the black and white, a little bit too close to motor cables. And especially with Creality printers, they don't use the top spec wire out there by any means. So there is a possibility of disturbance and noise being generated from your Z motors moving up and down that can also register as a false positive. Now, if you've ruled out all of your wiring, you're going to want to look into the configuration files. I believe it's under Config Advanced. There is a section for BL Touch timing, and it gives you features in there such as turn off the hot end and the bed pulse width modulation while it's lowering so that doesn't generate noise. And there's also a deployment delay, which also delays the deployment of the probe prior to moving down, just to make sure there's no electrical noise in there. So TLDR, check your wiring, then check the code.
Yeah. Speaking of the BL Touch, Jake from State Farm says, BL Touch is garbage in my opinion. You know, everybody's
Jake,
entitled to their opinion.
I
love the BL
accept your
Touch.
opinion as long as you tell me what is the better option then for you, because I find the BL Touch to be absolutely perfect. In fact, my repeatability tests are 0.002 millimeters or something really small where I barely have to baby step. I mean, the correct answer is nothing beats proper bed leveling, but nobody's perfect.
Now, let's talk about that for a second, because auto bed leveling, it really is not what it is. It's tramming the bed and giving you a diagram of what that bed looks like when it's actually probing. Your offset is going to be a key thing here when you're using a BL Touch or any kind of bed leveling sensor. You want to make sure that you've got your offset done correctly for the type of sensor that you're using, whether that's a BL Touch, a capacitive, or an inductive sensor. Would you agree?
I can tell you, yeah, and one thing I will say is the number of times the BL Touch failed was my own failure. I tried to get it, because I did not do a manual bed leveling before I did with the BL Touch, and what I found was sometimes it was because the print was failing because I had a differential of 3 or 4 millimeters across the bed, and that's not always easy to spot with the naked eye, especially when you're dealing with like a 10S5 build plate. So before you go and blame the BL Touch for bad bed leveling, check to make sure your bed is roughly level, because it's designed to deal with differentials on the bed. It's not meant to deal with a badly leveled bed, and that will apply to the Easy ABL, that'll apply to the BL Touch, it'll apply to the knockoff 3D touches, or any other bed leveling schema out there. By default, Marlin allows you up to 2 millimeters across the bed before it says probing failed, but there is a way to go past that, and I've tried it. And it does try to compensate upwards of 5 millimeters. So just food for thought.
So I'm just looking at the couple of questions that you put in here.
Yeah, I just grabbed some ones from the chat there. So
let's tackle Joseph Jolly's first. He says, I have had filament breaking on my Cr-10S Pro at the inlet of the run-out sensor. Any ideas? Check your filament. If it's breaking there, that's where it's going to break.
Going right back to what we were talking about, drying filament earlier. Now, I'm going to choose not to name the company because I do respect them, but I had received a batch of filament that was recalled, and the company went and gave me a whole new batch of filament free of charge and let me keep the old stuff. So as a result, I was able to go and print with it. But if I stopped at any point, the filament snapped. And that was right with the filament sensor right up against my reel. So actually the filament would snap in there and stay in place. If you're having issues like that, look at the mechanics first. Is your filament dry? And then is the route going down to the hot end as straight? Or if it has to curve, is it over a longer distance? If you have to go something real tight like that, you're going to apply tension. Now, if you fixed all of that, and you're still having issues, there is another option. I don't think I'm going to get my hands on it because I don't really have a need for it right now, but Big Tree Tech has a new filament runout sensor out that has an encoder in there that detects if the filament is moving or not. And I'm not sure how that integrates with Marlin, but my understanding is if it doesn't see the filament moving and yet the machine is extruding, it will go and initiate a filament changes if you've run out. So if any of you guys have played with it in the chat, let me know. I might try and get my hands on one in a while, but what with all the delays in China, it's getting a little tricky to get parts.
So LB Sharp from the chat has asked, and this kind of goes with the last question, will a dehydrator used to make beef jerky work to dry filament? Absolutely it will. And that's what a lot of guys are using.
It's the only way I'd recommend to do it. And the reason is although the pulse width modulation of that unit is not the greatest, you're not going to get, when you set 60 degrees, you're probably going to get 55 to 65. The main thing is it's designed to run at a lower temperature. And because PLA is supposed to be dried at between 50 and 60 degrees Celsius before you start getting binding and it starts to join to itself or warp a little bit, you're going to have less likelihood of overshooting versus if you try and use your oven. I'm going to say this, do not use an oven, do not use a toaster oven unless you've modified it with your own specialized controller, because you are going to melt your filament before you even know it.
Yeah. I'm going to let you take this next one from Jurgen. He did include pictures, and while you're reading out the question, I'll pull up some pictures here.
Yeah, bring them up. Okay, so he says, hello, TF Layer. I'm going to call ourselves T-Flayer now, okay?
T-Flayer?
I would like T-Flayer, yes. I would like to ask for some help with my problem. I want to print a duct fan for my Cr-10S5. While printing, the printer makes sudden, strange movements. Suddenly stopping, the extruder remains on site and makes a retraction of 10 to 15 centimeters. During that same print, it also stops the print head, makes a retraction and a homing to an axis X or Y. The print head returns and prints it further. At another point, the extruder makes a full retraction, so the filament is pulled from the extruder. The extruder then changes direction to return the filament to the printhead. This is a book, wow.
Yeah.
Then prints further, but the filament is no longer present and the printed object is lost. I have the print sliced with a default setting in Cura 4.4.1 dynamic 0.16 millimeter. He gave the details about how it goes rather slow. I sliced the same fan duct with Cura 3.6. Here he only has one problem. It has a sudden homing on the X or Y axis. Extreme spontaneous retractions are gone with a sudden freeze. It's perhaps a setting in Cura, but I can't find the problem.
Okay, I'm pulling up the pictures.
Let's have a look here.
Here, just give me a second. Just keep talking for a second. I'm going to pull them up.
I was just taking a look at the last here. So one possible cause would be maximum retraction count plus minimum distance extrusion window. That can cause some issues sometimes. But it almost sounds to me like either it's a bad SD card or the motors are having some kind of issue. I can't think off the top of my head why it wants to go home. But if it's trying to go one direction, it can also be bad end stops. So again, whenever I say go back to basics, I always say go check your wires and make sure everything is connected well. While it's printing, put your hand on the motor, and if it's feeling hot, then you're putting too much current through there. And we've got a video and post in the description below of the offset. Of the voltage you want to set it to.
Yeah, I'll go back to his video here. So here's the video.
Yeah.
Now, my suggestion for why this was doing this was one of two things. Either there was a problem with the firmware, or he had a bad SD card. And in this case, I think it was more of a bad SD card because it seems to be jumping around.
And I'm just taking a look at where it jumps to. The funny thing is the offset doesn't even seem that bad.
No, it doesn't. Now let's take a look at the print.
Yeah.
So we can see the print here. And based on the lines that we see going across here, the dribble lines, as I like to call them, we're seeing that this tells me, and then this line going out here, this tells me that this was probably a bad SD card. And he's got another video. Oh, it's just two images.
Just with the way it's going out, there are some settings for minimum layer time, but judging by the size of the print, you'd be going way past that time limitation every time. With the extrusion counts, I mean, by all means, you're probably not hitting 100 extrusions on that. I would, again, just try and keep it simple. If it's only doing the move along there, what's confusing to me is that it's returning to the same position.
I think
it's almost like it's trying to do some extra cooling or something. But
let me go back to what we discussed, because I did talk to him about this, and
while you look up the information there, we had a question in the chat from Adam C. Can any of us ask questions? Absolutely, 100%. We just got a small list of questions that came in via email this week, but we are, as the questions pop up, I'm copying them over to our list and we're squeezing them in between. And this is a nice hour. We got plenty of time. So hang around. Throw a thumbs up while you're at it.
So I had said to Jurgen that it might be a bad SD card. And that's what it did turn out to be, was a bad SD card. Since he's changed the
fun
SD
fact
card
this week.
What's that?
Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, it turned out to be a bad SD card, and that happens when you're writing and reading from an SD card so often, and sometimes you just get cheap ones. It happens. It can ruin your print.
So here's your fun fact about bad SD cards this week, about how it's never obvious. So I have a bunch of the big TreeTech E3 dip boards, and I had an issue where when I was flashing firmware on all of them, the firmware.bin, now for those of you who don't know with a 32-bit board, in general, when you put an SD card in your printer with the firmware.bin and you power it up, it's supposed to flash the firmware and then rename or delete the firmware file so that it doesn't reflash every boot. And what was happening to me was it was reflashing every boot on multiple machines. So I went and I just left it. I put on new G-code files, everything printed perfectly, no problems. But every time I would add a firmware.bin, it would not rename it. And therefore, every time I booted my machine, it reflashed the firmware, which can be quite annoying. So I finally gave in the other day because I was having some bugs with other stuff, and I just formatted the card fresh on the computer. I put the G-code files back that I had copied from that SD card to my computer and back to the SD card, and I put the firmware.bin on there. Well, after formatting that card, it worked properly. So rule number one, whenever you're having weird anomalies coming out of nowhere on your machine, the first thing you should do is format that SD card and then potentially replace it with a brand name SD card. And I've said this multiple times, SanDisk, Samsung, Lexmark, something brand name, it will last you beyond the lifetime of the machine.
I agree 100% on that. 100%. I'm just doing some overlays here, so just bear with me. I'll let you take the next question.
Okay, Adam C., I'm going to hit your question now. Is there any tips for small lines or bulges on an Ender 3? I've adjusted the eccentric nut on the right side of the X gantry, but that doesn't seem to fix the issue. Adam, is it only happening on one axis, or is it happening on the beginning of all lines? Basically, based off how you set up your slicer, and when you have newer firmwares, there's items that correct that too. It all comes down to what the filament is trying to do and where the temperatures are at. So bulging, the first thing I recommend with bulging at the beginning of a line is to drop your temperature. So PLA, up until lately, I've been using nothing but 210 degrees Celsius. However, lately I started experimenting just to see, because I found that a lot of my extruder clicking was a result of further upstream than on the hot end. So most of my machines, including my Volcano downstairs that's printing at 0.8 millimeter at a rapid speed right now, is running at 185 Celsius, to give you an idea. So dropping the temperature will always help deal with blobbing, stringing, and any other kind of flow issues. And I've always said, run the temperature tower and see, but then beyond that, do a test print and see how low you can get that temperature, because you might be shocked at how low it will go and still extrude. And the lower you can go, the better it's going to be, especially with PLA, where it likes to be cooled more rapidly.
There you go.
What about you, Richard? Any thought on that?
No, I think you pretty much covered that. I think you got that. You nailed that one on the head. I don't have to add anything to that one. I want to remind people here real quick. I'm just going to cut to another shot. I want to remind people that we are, in fact, you can follow us on multiple different social medias. You can see us over there on Facebook. If you're not a part of our Facebook group, I encourage you to do so there, because it's a hive mind, really, over there. And I'm sure you can agree with that. Everybody helps everybody else out over there. And if I can't get something or Bryan can't get something, there's always guys like Raymond Emsley. Who else is Ben Brady? Just a ton of people that will answer your question for you if we can't. So that's a good place to go. You can follow us on Instagram. We do post some behind the scenes stuff there every once in a while. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Cleveland I Am. And then, of course, right here on YouTube. So we got to get our little plug for ourselves out of the way this evening. And
absolutely. And those are the only official links. I'm just going to quickly put this out there. We had a little bit of confusion this week because there is a Amazon store that is launched with a very similar name to us, but is not affiliated with us. Now, legally, there's nothing we can do about that. So we're only going to say if it's posted by Richard, myself, or any of the admins of the First Layer Facebook group or on this YouTube page, it's from us. Otherwise, don't expect it to be us.
Yeah, just to reiterate that, a customer who bought something off of Amazon got a special card with a name that was almost identical to ours, but the artwork and everything was a little different. And they were offering a prize, and he contacted me asking me how he could get his prize, and I knew nothing about it, of course, and that's what kind of brought up the whole subject, that somebody has started a Facebook page, not a group, but a Facebook page, and they are also they've also got a Amazon store, which they are a reseller, I believe, of, or it's just a store. I'm not sure if they're keeping anything in stock themselves.
They actually are.
Are they?
They're running. Yeah, they've uploaded some stuff to the Amazon warehouse. So I just want to make it clear. I mean, I can't vouch for their reputability. They might be great, they might not be, but they are not us by any means. So
There you go.
just a little PSA there.
Okay, do you want to take this next one from Rasmus?
The
one you
yes.
just put in the
Where's
Google
Rasmus?
Doc.
Oh, that was just, he was saying a comment that he's got the smart filament sensor.
Okay.
Haven't tried it yet. Please let me know how it works out. Next one here from Dum Dev. Anybody? Yeah, that sounds like me. Anybody have a Pi camera work on first boot in Octoprint, then not work anymore? And I think he had said he has a couple of boards that have been acting like that.
I haven't had
I've
that
never
problem.
had that. No, but I can kind of give you a brief breakdown of how that works and where the failure might be. So there is a Octoprint does not run the webcam. There's another application in the back end which encodes the webcam to a media server basically on the Pi that then the Pi locally reads. And I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it was like FFmpeg motion or something along that line. So if you're having issues with that, unfortunately, you have to start digging into the diagnostics a little bit to determine what item has failed in there. But I would just take it easy, take a step back, and start with a clean install of Octopi. And if that continues to give you that issue, then I would report it on the Octoprint GitHub there, and they're very responsive. And if it's not a result of Octoprint, they'll direct you to the proper Git. So it's a good community. Hopefully that hopefully the reflash gets you resolved there, though. But there are some things that can go wrong, unfortunately, with it. FFmpeg streamer. There we go.
FFmpeg streamer. There you go. Then we've got Big Joe 426. TH3D stuff better than SKR boards? Is TH3? In all honesty, we can't say yes or no. And there's two reasons for that. One, we have not tested the TH3D board against the SKR board because Tim hasn't sent us one and we haven't purchased one. Usually Tim will reach out to me and ask me if I want to try something, but he hasn't in a while, so I'm not sure that he's sending out boards to anybody right at the moment. But
I know he had some delays with the situation.
If we do get a board to test against some other boards, we will let you guys know, and we'll do a full video on it. Let's go into LB Sharp's question. He says, hello, my name is Lonnie Sharp. What's that?
I was just going to say before that, where is it? Joseph Jolly said, I plan my Saturday evening around your show. Thank you. I've learned a lot.
Thanks. Thumbs up and a fist bump or a high five, whatever you want. So Lonnie Sharp here, he says, hi, my name's Lonnie Sharp, and I watch your videos a lot. Well, thank you very much, Lonnie. I do appreciate that. My first printer was the old Solid Doodle 3. Used it for about 4 years. Now, a couple of weeks so far, I have a Creality Cr-10 S. I use the 0.4 and 0.8 nozzles with direct drive and a micro Swiss hot end installed. We'll be adding a BL Touch for auto leveling. I haven't he says he hasn't installed it yet. Now for my question. Right now, I only know how to use SketchUp. Been using it for a very long time to create parts that make the old printer would always be accurate on the rectangle shapes, but all holes for the bolts and bolt heads always have to be oversized in SketchUp. To get the printer to print the correct size of the bolt, I always have to make 2 or 3 test prints before I can get them right. Now, with this new printer, I have the same problem. I am now using Cura 4.4.1 for my slicer. Is SketchUp the problem, or what could be the problem? I really don't want to team or learn a new CAD program, Fusion 360. Thinking of learning FreeCAD, but I just don't see how, if the printer makes any other shape other than the circle, be accurate with within a 0.001 per inch. Here's what I'm going to say to that. He goes on about a CNC router, but let's get back to the base question here. When you are making parts, whether you're making them in SketchUp, Fusion 360, or a CAD software, here's the problem. Now, it is in the printer, because the printer cannot translate accurately enough the size of holes that you need. And that's why we always tell people when they're designing, design those holes with a little bit of play or tolerance in them, or extra tolerance, so that you can get the bolt through and that you have a place for the head of the bolt to sit. Now, the reason that I say that is because if you don't, you are always going to be running into those issues. So I would increase the size or the tolerance around the actual bolt head and around the thread of the bolt itself that you're trying to put through there, and that should solve your problem. It doesn't matter what CAD program you're in. You got to understand that the CAD program doesn't know what size nozzle you're using, doesn't know what layer height you're using, doesn't know what layer width you're using. All it knows is this is a part. Yes, you sent it off to become an STL, and you're trying to turn it into an STL so that it can be turned into G-code and print. But something gets lost in the translation in size, and because of the nature of plastic, it will skew those tolerances a little bit. So you don't have to worry about learning a whole new program. You can still do everything that you're doing in SketchUp, but just remember to make those tolerances just a little bit bigger, just a few microns bigger. So if you've got a 4mm hole with a 6mm head, that hole should be 4.1, 4.15, just so that you have that tolerance. What do you say about that?
Yeah, what I actually end up doing is when I do use Fusion 360, and I'm going to go ahead and jump out and tell you, it is extremely easy to learn. You just have to take it a little bit slow. And once you learn how to draw a sketch and do that, the tools that are in there make it so easy. But to answer your question, whenever I'm designing holes, let's say if it's for an M3 bolt, what I'll do is if I'm going to thread it into that hole and basically grind out the filament into a thread, and I'm not modeling it, then I'll make it 3mm. But if I'm going to have the bolt pass straight through, I go with 3.5mm, and that is more than enough for it to pass through. And at the same time, it doesn't really offer it any wiggle room. Now, if you're curious about if your printer is printing accurately, step number 1 is to go to Thingiverse and download that bloody XYZ cube. Yep. You're going to print that and then pull out your calipers and measure every dimension. And you should be getting within at least 0.1 of a millimeter of within your model. If you're starting to notice that it's wider, it means you're over extruding. If you're starting to notice under, you might have other issues there. But generally, I find it's because it's over because people are either flowing a bit too much filament, or they're running it a bit too hot and it gets all blobby. The fact of the matter is Tinkercad should be making it pretty dimensionally accurate, and that's the best way to check and see if your machine's over extruding.
That's a good point. I want to point out that we got a super chat. And we want to give a thumbs up to Martin Bass. Martin Bass, thank you. There's a big thumbs up for you. Fist bump and a high five. So you get one of these. Thanks, buddy. we always do the super chat. We always recognize people in super chat. What's my wife's doing this?
Oh, she's tapping away on the keyboard.
Oh, she says I should be typing the fist bump and not.
Yeah, she should be typing out. Yeah.
My fingers don't work that fast. But thank you again.
The chat was asking in your Marlin setup video, Cr-10S, what do you set? Define temp sensor. I have updated the printer to a micro Swiss hot end. And what is X jerk, Y, Z, etc. So let's start with the define temp sensor setting. For your hot end, assuming you're reusing the thermistor, I believe it's 5. It's either 5 or 1. I always get the.
It's 1. Actually, it's 1.
Is it 1? That's right. It's 1 for the Creality one, 5 for the E3D cartridge.
Correct.
If I recall.
Yes.
To be honest, they're so close. They're kind of interchangeable. So if you get the wrong one, it'll probably still work fine. But officially, 1 Creality, 5 E3D. In regards to jerk, XYZ, I'm with Richard. I set mine to 8mm for X, 8mm for Y, and I believe the default in 2.0 is 5 for the extruder, and then for the Z, I think it's 0.3. So the only ones I would change are the X and Y. I drop those down to 8, and I wouldn't go any higher unless you start noticing your corners are too rounded for some weird reason on your machine. If you have a Core XY machine, you can go as high as 20, but you're going to notice anything above 8, you're going to start seeing ringing and vibration noise on any traditional Cartesian machine.
So we've got another question here in our list of questions. We've got quite a few actually that we still have to cover in this next half hour. So we might run over tonight just so everybody's aware. So let's grab here Bodwin. I hope I said that right because I think the S is silent. Bodwin, he says, love your show, but I don't always get to see it live because I am third shifter and it's on when I'm just getting ready for work. Stop moving your mouse because it's turning pink and it's freaking me out. I asked a question on Saturday's show that Bryan answered using the M600 code. I'm trying to change filament in the middle of a print. I can determine the layer to make the change. I go to the extensions, post-processing, modify G-code, then I click on add script. Click on the filament, change, then I see the layer, initial retraction, later retraction distance. I see what those mean, but I don't see a place to put the M600. I tried layer number 4 just to test a print and not waste a ton of filament, but prints the whole print and never gives me a chance to change filament. Can you please go into this with more detail? I'm using Cura 3.6. It is not available in 3.6. If it is not available, why does it list filament change in the list? Thank you for any help you can give on this for this newbie. Well, Bryan, you want to take this? Or...
Okay, let me. Okay, so let's take a step back here. I'm just taking a look at Cura 4.4 because I personally actually haven't used this. I usually just pause it myself by eyeballing it. But if I go, I'm just gonna try and slice up something here in the meantime. I've added in the post-processing scripts. There's a filament change option. You can select the layer number, which I was hoping it would be a height, but I guess it's just the layer number. So let's say layer number 7 or 8. I'm going to throw a file in there. I have
Can you pull up your screen and I'll just cut it to you?
I'm just going to see if I have anything on this computer. I'm really bad for having files to slice on this computer, so just bear with me here. What have I got? BL Touch Right. Okay. So let me just switch over to my. Do I have a monitor 2 here? Whoa!
There we go.
We're gonna have a mini preview of ourselves here down Infinity. That's my video preview, so you get to see all that. But I've gone up to the extensions, post processing, and modify G code, and I've added a filament change at layer 8. Initial retraction, layer retraction distance. So this says layer filament for removal. So this script itself, I think, actually does its own filament swap out. Let's save the file and see what this thing does here. Save as BL Touch. Let's open up the editor here. There we go. Edit with Notepad++. Okay, so where's our filament runout change here? We said, what height did we say that was at? That was at layer number 8. Let's find layer 50, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Layer 8, wall inner, wall outer, wall inner, wall outer, wall inner. Let's go find layer 9. How about that? Let's see if there's a filament change. Oh. Okay, M600 right here. So this line here says when we hit height 1.6, which is, that's going to be about layer 8. It issues an M600 command, and it says the distance and all that. I have a feeling Marlin no longer uses these extra arguments. However, that being said, it should still issue the M600. So what does that mean? That probably means that your printer firmware does not have M600 enabled. And let me see if I can pull up my firmware here real quick. Have some version of Visual Studio Code on here. And we'll shrink this window up for you guys so it's less distracting there. Okay, big old Marlin print here. So let's go find the filament change area here. Or is it filament runout? Nope. There's an M600 somewhere in here.
Just type in M600.
Welcome to the joy. There we go. Filament runout script. So you do have to have in Marlin 2.0 the filament runout sensor enabled in order to. Actually, I'm sorry. The M600 should be in there past that. Let me just make sure M600. Advanced pause. That's what it's called. I apologize, guys. There's so much code to go through. So in your configuration advanced.h, there's a section of code, advanced pause, and that's what your filament runout script is. When you issue to your printer M600, sorry, you're getting a lot of flickering here with this computer tonight. The M600 is supposed to go and pause routine. So if it's not doing that, then I don't think this section of code is enabled. So when you're in your script, oh, I'm so sorry, that's flickering like terribly. I'll switch back to my other camera here, but the advanced pause feature is what you're going to want to look for. Enable that, and if you want to check to see if your printer does have the M600 in there, go and create a G-code file. Just put M600 in there. Just nothing else, just M600. And it will finish right away. I'm so sorry. This flickering is terrible.
That's okay.
It will either print and it will go and run the filament runout and the change script, or it's just going to go straight to finished. It goes straight. Your printer doesn't have that in there.
All right. So
yeah.
it looks like Brian's back now. He was frozen for a second. I'm
hopping in and out.
There you go. I'm going to pull up this question from Bill McDonald. He says, I have a solid bed mounts and a BL Touch on my Ender 3. The big leveling wheels keep coming loose. Do you know of any issues if I replace the wheels with locking nuts? You can go ahead and replace them with nylocks if you want to. I've never had an issue with that. My messenger's going off like crazy in the background here. But I've never had an issue with those coming loose. If they are, it means that you haven't tightened them down tight enough for starters. So just give them an extra little crank and that should be fine. But if you really want to make things work for you, go ahead and put some nylocks on it. It won't hurt anything.
Just remember that those screws, they shouldn't be coming loose even if you hand tighten them there. If they are, you might want to keep an eye on your machine. I think you're having some excess vibrations there, but you could go with the nylocks. I would just put like Loctite blue on it, honestly. If you're using fixed heights and if you know your bed's leveled and all that, I would look into Loctite. And I would also consider maybe putting a washer on either end of those fixed risers there. That way it has less room to wiggle back and forth on that nut.
Kevin Conrad, greetings, Richard. I have a printer that I believe has flat spots in the bed wheels. If I manually move the bed, I can feel 2 to 3 distinct lumps in the movement. I've taken the bed off of the rails, cleaned the rollers and the rails just to make sure it wasn't a small piece of filament or something. I can't visibly see a flat spot, but I guess it could be the wheels on the bearings. Also, I just should I buy new wheels? Of course, there are a ton of no-name brands on Amazon, which I'm not a fan of. What should I look out for or avoid? Here is the answer to that, Kevin. It is not the wheels, and I'll tell you what's happening here. You are over-tightening the eccentric nuts on those wheels. When you over-tighten them, it will give you what feels like flat spots along that extrusion piece. You just want it so that it's not super stiff, but you want it so none of those wheels will move separately. If you do that, then you shouldn't get any of that clunking on the bed. It is because your centric spacers are too tight. I will guarantee that because I've seen it so many times in the past, and it's just a little tweak. We can over tighten those eccentric spacers and it can cause a lot of problems for us. So just go ahead and just loosen them up just a little bit, but make sure all the wheels are still in contact with those rails and that none of them can move freely, and you should be set.
And of course, my other little piece of feedback for that, because it took me way too long to discover this week, is make sure there's no warping or bends in your Y carriage plate, the black piece that sits in between your wheels and your bed. I went and I had issues with my printer, so I went and I think I bought like 12 polycarbonate wheels, because that's what the 10S5 requires, and it sounded great. And then I slept through one night as the roommates were freaking out because there was this ticking, grinding sound going back and forth. Just so you guys know, polycarbonate wheels do not wear down like the regular wheels. So even if you pressure that thing to no end, your bearings are just going to keep grinding away happily. And at the end of the day, that's what it was the Y carriage build plate was warped, and I didn't notice it till I built a linear rails rig for it, and went with my fixed with risers for my bed, that I noticed that the whole thing was crooked. So I actually ended up having to go back to springs basically to correct that. So don't rule out anything down there. Just look at it, tighten it properly before you attach the bed again, and just give it a push back and forth and make sure it moves end to end without any resistance, but also has no wiggle.
So you put a question in here from Robert Marvin, and then we've got two after that. So I'm going to let you answer this Robert Marvin question.
All right. So Robert Marvin was saying, on my CR10 on the control box, when I turn the control knob to make a menu selection, it does not always respond at first twist. I find I have to spin it around several times. Now, I'm going to assume you have the stock board and the stock firmware. And if that's the case, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do to improve that situation. So what happens is the screen on your printer is actually hand drawn by the processor several times per second, and then in between that it's doing G-code. So especially when you're printing or you're doing a special function there, it might hold up the printer. There are some settings in configuration.h that deal with the rotary encoder for how many turns before it registers as a proper turn and whatnot. But on the base firmware, it was really bad. In fact, on the Creality machines, if you go into that firmware and you spin that knob quite fast for a couple, let's say 15 or 20 rotations there, you'll actually cause the printer firmware to freeze and it will reboot, which is not fun mid-print. So I'm going to tell you, don't do that. In fact, upgrade your Cr-10S firmware to the latest Marlin at the first opportunity. You'll also find that the whole rotary dial and screen functionality is improved. They have acceleration things now, so when you start turning it, if you keep turning it quick enough, it'll actually increase the jump. So when you're cranking up a temperature, it'll go up a couple degrees, and then suddenly it'll jump up to like 70, 80 degrees, and it does improve things. It's just not perfect. The end-all be-all is to go to a 32-bit board where there's more processing overhead and the screen response time is much better.
There you go. So Andrew Bell, we're finally getting to Andrew Bell. he's our second last question in our document tonight. He says, "Hi Richard and gang, could you help me? I have stock of the majority of my Ender 3, and I have just updated to Marlin 1.9. I'm now concerned that the main PCB will not manage to produce the same quality of prints. In fact, in doing this, I seem to have had a lot more failed prints, and I have had to level the bed more than I did with the stock firmware. So do I need to upgrade to the MKS Gen L with stepper motor drivers? Will this make a difference? Any advice is welcome. Thanks in advance." And that's Andy in Newcastle, UK. And I believe Andy's in our chat tonight. So what I want to say to you, Andy, on that note is I would go back to the stock firmware on the board. What upgrades are you really making? Now you got to remember, when you're in 1.9, it's adding in extra things that Creality pulled out because of the limitations of the board's flash memory or its ability to hold commands in its cache memory, not the flash memory, but the cache. So what I would say to you is go back to the original firmware. If you want to make new firmware, use 2.0. And if you want to upgrade the board, you know, yesterday, 6 months ago, I would have said Gen L board all the way, 100% Gen L board. But since the SKR E3 dip and the Mini E3 have come out with 2208 and 2209 stepper drivers, it is a far better solution for the same money. And they are direct fit-in or direct replacement for the Ender 3 board. So they will fit all the same hole patterns, and they will also fit all the cutouts for where you need to put in your SD card and where you might want to add your USB cord. So, Andrew, I would say go back to the original firmware instead of using 1.9, or if you want to move up in boards, go with the SKR. That's my suggestion. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, I 100% agree. With the original firmwares, I mean, bear in mind, Creality used a very old version of Marlin. I think it was 1.1.0 as for the latest one. And you got to bear in mind, yes, there are new features that come into Marlin, but there's also enhancements on how the chipset processes things. Now, that being said, I'm 100% on the way that I would have said go with like an MKS Gen L, even though in actuality, buying that board will not at all change your processing power. It just gives you a little more flexibility. But now these SKR, well, I don't call them SKRs. Are they called SKRs? The Mini E3?
Yeah,
and the
there's still an SKR board, yeah.
These big tree tech boards. They originally picked a chipset that was not well supported in Marlin, but has since gained a huge amount of development support. So as of the past literally month, it has become much easier to get the stable build of Marlin running on that chip. And although you can't enable every feature in the book, that's the downside of a $1.50 chip that they're choosing to purchase on this board, it still leaps and bounds ahead of the Creality and every other brand 8-bit boards. So I'm running the E3 dip board on almost every single one of my machines, and the one that isn't is actually running the SKR 1.3 behind me here. But they're all fully capable boards. They will improve your printing experience. I'm starting to wonder if when you upgrade to 1.9, if there were some settings that weren't translated over properly from the old ones, such as jerk, acceleration, and etc. So
That's
we just did a.
That's what I would think.
We just did we just did a video on building Marlin. I think for the Cr-10 S, was it?
Yes.
Yes. I would watch that video because there is default configurations kind of designed by the vendors. They've been very well supported lately. That you can just go and download the latest version of Marlin, copy those config files into the folder, and build it, and you're good to go. You know, it's going to run with the exact same parameters that are on that original firmware from Creality in this case, but it's going to have all the new Marlin features. So I would check that out, and then if you're still having issues, post some photos on our Facebook group. If you guys haven't joined, go ahead and check it out at facebook.com/thefirstlayer. We've got a great community of people that can look at that print and immediately say, I had that issue, here's how I resolved it. And it's a great discussion area for all these questions.
Now, we are going to be doing a video later in the spring, before summer, where we compare some of the most popular boards that are out there today against other boards on a single machine. So we will be showing you guys that, and that might be a great video to help you solve some problems. Now, I want to say Andrew Bell says, brilliant, thanks for the information, but how do you go backwards to stock firmware? The same way you went forwards with stock firmware. All you're going to do is download the stock firmware from Creality's website. You're going to pick the one for your machine. If it's the Ender 3 or the Ender 3 Pro, don't get the hex file. Just get the complete source code firmware, and then it'll be easy to upload. It's really, really simple. All right, so last question, and we're coming up on 1:08. From Richard Taylor, our good friend here in Calgary. He says, can you print flexible filament using the factory hot end on the Ender 3 Pro or Cr-10? Here's the short answer, no. The short answer is no, or the quick answer is no, but the more complicated answer is it depends on if you're using the stock extruder or not. If you're using the stock extruder, it does not work well. You really need to have a tight path for that flexible material to go down So you want to have, you also want to have a double geared system. It works much better with a double geared system. You can buy double geared systems for under $100. Actually, Creality makes one, and it's really, really good. And it's become kind of competition to the Bondtech. But stock, no, you could not do it stock. Some people have been successful in doing it, but for the majority of people, I say no. So that's the short answer, and the longer answer is you do need to upgrade your extruder.
Absolutely, and it comes down to 100% on the extruder. Now, the factory hot end, yeah, you can.
Yeah, the factory hot end you can, but not the extruder.
The hot end's fine, but there's a cheap double geared extruder on Amazon for $25 that I've been using, and so far so good. I don't do a lot of flexibles, but the fact is flexibles are really funny, and the more flexible they become, when you get into like I think it's the 90 hardness and all that, it basically will flop around in your extruder. So you need to reduce the motion paths in there. I don't do a lot of flexibles, but that's just what to take into account, is that it's going to wiggle all over the place. So the less Bowden tube it can move in, the better. Better quality tubing like Capricorn tubing will help, but not completely alleviate that. And then, of course, look at places where it could wiggle out and extrude all over your room, as I've had that done too.
Yeah. Edisher has a great question. He says, gents, for the moment, let's forget the price tag and please tell us the best board for a moment. Thanks. Okay. We both have different opinions on this. Best board, in my opinion, right now, depending on the machine, of course, this is where this becomes a more complicated question. But depending on the machine, if you're with a Creality machine, I cannot say this enough. The best board is the E3 dip or the mini E3 from SKR. Hands down, those become the best board. I know you're not talking price, but price is a factor there. It's a fairly low-cost board. If you've got the money, a Duet, hands down. That's the best board on the market today. For me, it even beats out Rambo boards. It beats out MKS boards and any other factory board out there. Duet is by far a superior board, and it's got a much nicer interface for programming.
Mm-hmm. And I'll kind of elaborate a little bit on that. I do agree, and as I said, I've been running E3 dip boards on all my machines, and I have explicitly not used the mini E3 V1.2. So when you're evaluating a board, you have to look at what its feature set is, right? The Duets, they come with Wi-Fi. Cool, that's great. That board's also $200. I can buy a Raspberry Pi, hook it in up with Octoprint, get the same feature, better, for half the price combined. But when it comes to cheap boards, what you got to look at is what features does it have on that board that you need, and what is it capable of. So the reason I have the E3 dip on all my machines is because the steppers are replaceable. So the base board without steppers comes in at below $20 US, which is disgustingly cheap. The only reason I don't like that board is because it's using the STM32 family of processors. That's why I have the SKR 1.3 behind me here, which is normally a bit more expensive, but it runs on the LPC chips, which just are more stable with Marlin. That being said, the money you save on the STM32 boards, you can invest into better steppers. So on my machine downstairs, I'm running 2208s on, I believe, the X, Y, and E. No, I'm running 2208s on the X, Z, and the E. And on the Y, I'm running a 5160, and they're all in different software control modes. The reason I like the E3 dip is because through jumpers, you can set up the SPI, UART, or standalone mode without having jumper wires in there. And that was something that up until these guys, as far as I saw, it did not exist. So you have a nice clean board with no jumpers in there. And if you just need to switch out from a UART to a standalone stepper, it's a matter of removing the stepper and putting some jumpers in underneath it. So, I mean, I haven't tried the TH3D board. I haven't tried the Duet. I haven't tried the Large. But I can't see any features that warrant even close to double the price, let alone 5 or 6 times of what they're charging. So the only risk I see you encountering with the with the E3 dip board is they do have small MOSFETs, and so there is an inherent risk of overheating if you use a higher powered heater cartridge or if you have a higher powered heated bed. However, you can buy a MOSFET for $20 these days, and that's what I have on my 10S5 downstairs. I've got Z motor splitters running the Z on a 2208. I've got a MOSFET running the big 240 watt bed, and there has not been a board failure yet. So if you guys can tell me what magical feature can warrant, in some cases, up to a 10 times price increase, let me know in the chat below, because my machines are humming great with these cheap boards.
Well, there you have it. So short answer is I like the SKRs, you like the SKRs. If money's no object, then Duet is the way to go. Okay, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another Ask for Help. We hope that this helped you out with some of the questions that you had this week. The email, again, is now open. I'm just going to go to that little screen. So I'm going to cut you off here, Brian. I do apologize.
Yeah. Hello.
Oh, there you are. No, I didn't do it. It's all you.
Yes, it's the Bryan. Oh.
All right. Yeah. Now you're back. So if you have questions, the email is now open. You can submit your questions up until Friday night. And there it is right up on the screen. So you can, other way. There we go. So you can submit your questions to questions@thefirstlayer.com. Questions, we do stop taking questions on Saturday night, or pardon me, on Friday night, so that if we have to research something because we don't know the answer, and sometimes we have to do that, then we have a little bit of time to do that. Now, the other thing I do want to point out to you guys is this right here. If you're looking for some fantastic merch, you can always go to our Teespring store and get yourself a t-shirt or a hoodie or a mug or whatever you need. And that's just simply by going to teespring.com/store/thefirstlayer-2. And you can pick yourself up some merch. We're going to be putting some stuff on sale pretty soon, and we've got some new t-shirt designs coming, so you may want to check that out. With that said, I'll go back to me and Brian here. There we go. And again, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We hope to see you here again on Wednesday. This week is going to be a good week. We'll get the episode up that we tried to get up last week, but due to migraines, I was unable to, and Brian had such a busy schedule he couldn't edit for me. So we're going to go ahead and get that video out this Wednesday, and that is on supports in Cura. We're demystifying supports in Cura for you. So this is an up-to-date using 4.4.1, and we'll show you all the ins and outs of using supports, and maybe it'll help you in your next print. And we've got a couple of prints that's been sitting down here. My wife's been dying to take the support material off it because she just loves the prints, but I'm not going to show you those. So until next time, Brian, thanks for joining me again tonight.
Thanks again, Richard.
And we will see you guys on Wednesday with a brand new episode, and then live again here next Saturday night at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Now remember, until next time, the First Layer is always your foundation to a great print.
See you, everybody.